Begin.
Good evening, we're 421, and tonight we're going to be discussing the brain and cognitive functioning. Now the first thing I want you to remember is that the brain is a very vast and complex thing that's constantly changing and developing. As such, you can't expect the brain of a child to be like that of an adult. And so people learn differently, and it's very, very difficult to understand. So we're going to briefly discuss things, and so we're going to break it up into 5 subjects. Brain basics, memory, intelligence, cognitive development and wisdom, and learning disorders. Now first, Christine is going to talk about brain basics.
Hi guys, so I thought it would be a good idea to start with some basics of cognitive psychology, because unless you take a course in it or you're really interested, most of you probably are like, what's this, right? So cognitive psychology is the science of how the mind is organized to produce intelligent thought and how the mind is realized in the brain. It studies mental processes such as perception, mental task switching, memory, attention, language, and problem solving. The cognitive revolution was between the 1950s and the 1970s. The 3 main influences were research on human performance, development of information processing, specifically artificial intelligence, and linguistics. Linguistics was important because it showed that language was more complex than we thought, and it separated cognitive psychology from behavioral psychology. The brain. The brain is the control center for our body. So it monitors everything from our heart rate to processing outside data. So one way to think of it is the brain is the hardware of our body and the mind is the software of our body. There are 2 maps that explain the brain. So the first one is the Truman brain, which has the reptilian brain, the limbic system, and then followed by the neocortex. Next is the hemispheric brain, also known as the cerebral cortex, and it has 4 major parts: the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe. And lastly, I'm going to talk about cognitive neuroscience. So cognitive neuroscience is the study of how cognition is realized in the brain. So I just have 3 examples here that basically are some ways that we study the brain. So this one here, does anyone know how to say this? Because I don't either, so if I butcher it, I'm sorry. So it's electroencephalography. I don't know if I said that right, but we're just going to call this EEG. Then we also have magnetic resonance imaging, which is MRI. And then lastly, transcranial, transcranial magnetic, whatever. So, TMS, let's call it that. So TMS is a procedure where a coil placed in the scalp introduces currents to the brain to interfere with neural activity. So we're going to show you a short video just to show you an idea of TMS and how it works.
I'm Roger Highfield. I'm the science editor of the Daily Telegraph. Now, words mean everything to me, but now I'm going to have the speech area of my brain turned off with a giant magnet. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again.
So this just shows you that transcranial magnetic resonance shows you how magnetic stimulation, there you go, shows you what areas of the brain control what. And it's really good for patients who have strokes because they can show you which part of the brain actually is affected by strokes. And now Ms. Sharika is going to discuss memory.
Hi guys. So, cognitive psychology is not only limited to the functions of the brain, but it also includes a lot of memory in its processes. I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of memory. So there are 3 major forms of memory: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. So right now I'm going to talk about sensory memory. So our senses, initial experience of something, that's pretty much our sensory memory. So it has to do with our senses: sight, touch, hearing, taste, smell. And whether or not you realize it, we actually experience so much of these within 1 second. In a simple walk to Baruch, you'll see hundreds of people, tons of colors. hear tons of taxis honking, smell really suspicious smells from God knows where in the sewers. But our brains can't process all of that information at once. So then we move on to the second stage of memory, which is the working memory. The working memory pays attention to the information in our sensory memory. It helps with encoding, abstracting, selecting, retrieving, and other mental processing. This is also considered a form of transient memory and short-term memory. It helps to sort through what's important and what's not so that our brain knows what to do with it, so that we're not constantly overwhelmed by everything that we're seeing. Working memory is the ability to temporarily hold and manipulate information for cognitive tasks performed in daily life. So some of the things it does is it holds information for a few seconds, just like maybe a number we quickly need to remember. It can hold several items at a time. 5 to 7 is generally the amount you want to stick with for like short to-do list in your head. It holds and manipulates information, figures out where to send it to which parts of the brain, and it also depends on how much control and mental effort you put into what you're doing. So if you're kind of like not really about it, not really paying attention, chances of you actually remembering that working memory, it's not gonna come through for you. Then there's long-term memory, which is the third stage, and this long-term memory has 3 divisions. There's procedural memory, episodic memory, and semantic memory. The procedural memory, it consists of the cognitive and motor skills we have learned. A lot of these skills are things that we do on a daily basis, and they have become so natural to us that we no longer think about it. Things such as speaking, walking, reading, and some might say riding a bike, but some might also forget, and they wouldn't consider it procedural memory. There is episodic memory, which is memories of past events or experiences being recalled with the sights, sounds, and feelings of the original experience. Now, I think this is actually my favorite part when it comes to teaching, because the great part about this is that it really relies on empathy. So when you can recall a feeling and emotion, so say you were humiliated one time in a classroom by a professor. So when you're now that teacher and you're put in that position, you're going to try very hard not to have that same experience happen and to create that safe environment, because you can rely on your episodic memory to remember what that felt like. So you're going to help create a better learning environment for your students. Then there's semantic memory, which is knowledge of facts, understandings, and meanings that we have acquired as a result of life experiences and learning. Another easy way of saying this is common knowledge. So who can tell me who this handsome gentleman right here is? George Washington. That's a wonderful example of your semantic memory. And as most of you know, he's our first president. So just general facts like that is what we would consider our semantic memory. And now I'm going to hand this over to Ashley, who will tell us about intelligence.
Hi. So intelligence is a term that we're all commonly associated with, and we can easily define it as being able to process and utilize that information. Now, intelligence is kind of tricky. Even though we know what it is, it's very hard to say which behaviors can be considered part of intelligence and how do we measure it exactly. Commonly used ones is IQ test. IQ test stands for intelligent quotient. And it generally tests for like mathematics, how you process information, short-term memory. But the problem with this is that people say that it's not applicable over time. So if you're young and you take it now, let's say that you take it when you're 60, you might not get the same score. So Thurstone developed the primary mental abilities test, which tests the same thing as IQ, but it breaks down all the factors even more so it's geared towards adult intelligence. But even more so, it's still very complex to say which actual aspects can be considered part of intelligence. So we break it down with openness, fluid, crystallized intelligence, or for short, OFCI, because it's a mouthful. So openness, which Pavlov's dogs have beautifully explained to us before, has to do with being open to new experiences. It's mostly made up of several different personality dimensions, such as being able to want variety and imagination. So if you have low openness, you're not going to be comfortable in a new environment or want to learn new experiences. The adverse is applicable for high openness. We have fluid intelligence, which is part of the central nervous system. It's how you use logic and reasoning. It's things that's innate in you. Whereas you have crystallized intelligence, which is something that you learn. It's gained and you have it through experience or even in a classroom setting. So what does this mean with OFCI and late adulthood. The crystallized intelligence is about experience. So obviously over time, you're gonna be gaining experience. But it so happens that as you approach late adulthood, you have cognitive decline, which is gonna affect the nervous system. And if the fluid intelligence is brought on by the nervous system, that's obviously gonna be declining. So you're gonna be more dependent on experience. One of the factors that influences experience is culture. If a culture each culture values every aspect of intelligence differently. Sorry, can't speak today. So some cultures value experience more so than education. So if a culture values so highly experience, there's actual cultures that only reach up to a middle school education. But then you have some cultures that put such a high emphasis on education that people lack experience, they lack social skills because they don't interact with one another. It's very important to have this balance between experience and education. Likewise, you need to have a balance between crystallized and fluid intelligence. One of the ways you can think about crystallized and fluid intelligence is through top-down and bottom-up processing. So top-down processing relies on your experience, which you already know, which you can associate with crystallized intelligence. Bottom-up has to do with using logic, building up on small information, which you can associate with fluid intelligence. So now, if you're so heavily reliant on experience, then you're not gonna be able to use your logic as much anymore. You're gonna feel uncomfortable learning new information. You're gonna have low openness. If you have low openness, then you're not gonna want to attend training sessions. You're not gonna want to interact with others. And it's gonna affect your workplace environment. So now, we have Kamala who's going to discuss cognitive development and wisdom.
Okay, so as Christine has already talked about cognitive psychology, I will be focusing on cognitive development and wisdom. Cognitive functioning is all about brain and neurological system. Understanding cognitive functions can help understand how humans are different in their cognitive abilities. Now the question is, can adults be helped to acquire cognitive abilities similar to the manner in which children are taught to develop them? Before answering this question, let's look on to wisdom. Wisdom is an judgment about essence of life and values of good morality such as compassion, superior intentions, and good character. Over the time, aging can impact the ability to employ attention, retain memory, as well as number of other cognitive abilities. That is why it becomes important to understand the changes in cognitive functions over time. This is crucial in determining the variations in teaching styles used for adults and children. For adults, to acquire wisdom, the social environment which is exclusive to being an adult plays an important role as well as the ability to adapt to it. Adult acquisition of wisdom also requires resource and human support, training, and lack of excessive negativity, and for children, acquire wisdom-related knowledge and judgment. After all these discussions, we can say adults and children must be taught to acquire wisdom in different manners because the manner in which wisdom is selected, retained, and employed by them is different. And the reason to say this is because of the difference in attention and working memory systems of different age groups. That is why teaching children should be focused on building attention and working memory by giving it direction. On the other hand, adults should be taught by stimulating the attention and working memory to keep it active. Now, after we'll be presenting you guys about learning disorder.
Thank you very much, Kamala. And for those of you who didn't hear, and for those of you who do know, and for those of you who don't know, are just wondering, who am I? I am Ahmed Khan. So, learning disorder. Okay, as future teachers to students, whether it's going to be in the classroom or with your co-workers and stuff like that, we need to be aware that mental illnesses and learning disorders affects how our students will learn data. So, first, we need to figure out why or what is the main cause of learning disorder. Anybody? Nobody. Okay, so the main cause is in working memory defect. As Ms. Shalika says, working memory is like short-term memory. And with short-term memories, like when we get information, it processes into different, whether it's something we want to learn for the long term, or if it's just trash that we can get rid of. Like for example, these 4 lovely ladies over here. If I have a stack of information and I disperse it among these 4, they can finish it in like 5-10 minutes, or however fast they work. But for working memory, if let's say 3 of them are defective and there's only 1 of them, if I gave her the entire stack, she's gonna do it at her own pace, and she has her limits. And then it's gonna keep, the work is gonna keep piling up, and then she's not gonna be able to do it, and then there's burnout. So, what are some types of learning disabilities? First, we have dyslexia, where a person has difficulty understanding and processing reading and writing, and this deals with the phonological working memory type. Next, we have dyscalculia, which is difficulty understanding math, which uses the executive working memory. We have central auditory processing disorder, where it's hard for people to understand and process what has been spoken to them. Like if somebody gave you instructions and you're confused, or you do the opposite of what the instruction says, like that telephone game we played earlier. And this uses the articulatory working memory. There's dysgraphia, where people have troubles with shapes and spaces, like they have bad handwriting, they can't color within the line, and this has a defect in the visuospatial working memory. And then there's non-verbal learning disability, where people can't understand and process body language and facial expression, and this uses central working memory. Now that we know some types of learning disorders, let's focusing on the characteristics of people. Some characteristics of people with working disorders are they feel embarrassed, they fear that they might be fired, or that these young people know what to do and they don't, and it's hard for them. And they have a pessimistic type personality. Like they always say that I can't do this rather than I can. They always see themselves as a loser, and if they're successful, they say, well, I'm an imposter, like the imposter syndrome we learned in the second week. They have a lot of emotional baggage of frustration and pressure that affects their lives, and some of them, they have to wear a mask to cover it up so people won't know that they have this learning disorder, as if they were some kind of monster. And then there's the complete opposite, flip of the other side of the coin, the positive people, who motivates to overcome. They're resilient. Failure does not faze them. This is usually the type of people who understands and learn that they have a learning disorder when they're young, because they've developed and understands processes, tricks of the trade of what to do and how to combat this. And so when they become adults, they're like, okay, I know what to do, let me do it. Instead of people who didn't learn that when they were young and when they were children, that they have these learning disorders. So when they're trying to learn it as an adult, it's hard for them, because our brain peaks at the age around 24, and after that there's a decline. And so everything seems much, much harder. Now, as a teacher, we should be aware that, we shouldn't be narrow-minded, that only people with learning disorders have difficulty learning. People with mental disorders also have difficulty learning, such as people with, an eating disorder, or who has depression, PTSD, or schizophrenia. These condition will interfere with their learning processes, because they don't, for eating disorder, they won't get the nutrients, and they won't, are focused to learn. So, as teachers, we need to understand that each student and children or adults, they share the disability, but they don't by name only, and it's not by experience or strategies how to combat it. Each case is different, just like our students. They're unique and different, just like our students. So, as teachers, we need to have, certain characteristics. Teachers, who remember this? Anybody? It's on the midterm. Anybody? Look, you get a midterm review with this presentation. So, teacher represents trust, empathy, authenticity, confidence, humility, and enthusiasm. And all I want to say to conclude is that this is a lifelong battle that currently cannot be won. But as teachers, we should make our classroom and our students feel better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.